Today, I want to help you choose wisely between Samsung's latest flagship, the Galaxy S25 Ultra, and Apple's latest iPhone 16 Pro Max. I'm going to help you find out which is the better fit for you, and also let you know which one of these devices is going to be staying in my own pocket. The iPhone 16 Pro Max is $1199, and it brought in camera control, a new way to control the camera system, a new 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a larger 6.9-inch display, which is the largest display that Apple's put in a smartphone, period. The S25 Ultra, on the other hand, is $1299, and it also has a 6.9-inch display, a new 50 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and it also just has a whole new look with these rounded edges. Yeah, I guess the similarities this year are quite striking. So let's talk about the design then. I think it's quite obvious that smartphones are kind of peaking, and both of which have a very similar look and feel. Both with flat edges, both are titanium, and are both sandwiched between two slabs of glass. The S25 Ultra is lighter at 218 grams versus the 217 grams on the iPhone, and I think because of the weight balance, especially with the iPhone's larger camera cutout on the top, the Ultra does feel a touch lighter. And by no means between these two is this a really big deal. I'm just giving you an observation that I find the S25 Ultra is a little lighter in the hand, but I don't think that's because of the actual difference in weight. I think it's just how the weight is distributed. Now, I would actually argue that the iPhone feels a little better in hand due to those more rounded corners. Oddly enough, both of these phones are almost exactly the same in terms of dimensions when you put them up against each other. And I say oddly enough because the Samsung really does feel like it has more of a presence in your hand. The Ultra is also a hair thicker than the iPhone, but all in, both are very premium feeling devices. Though I think the S25 Ultra kind of takes the cake when it comes to that display, especially for content consumption. But before we go any further and touch on the display, I just want to say thank you so much for the support that you've been showing me on the channel. We're actually very close to 50,000 subscribers, and I can't thank you all enough. It really does mean the absolute world. We're aiming to hit that by the end of February, so a like and a sub on this channel really goes a long way. Okay, those displays. Look, there's something that we need to talk about quickly. I mean, technically speaking, the iPhone 16 Pro Max does have a better display. The iPhone uses a 10-bit panel, whereas the Samsung is using an 8-bit panel. Now, this has been a huge rabbit hole, but I'll just say this. 10-bit is undeniably better, and it's no excuse that the S25 Ultra is missing it, especially when you consider the fact that Samsung is supplying their displays to Apple. This means that the Ultra will be able to show less colors, creating an effect in some instances, like in gradients, called banding, rather than having a smooth transition between these colors. But to be honest, after using the both of them, I really do feel like the S25 Ultra's display is better than the iPhone's. Here's the thing, for YouTube videos, sure, both are similar. I mean, with 16:9 content, you're gonna get a very similar display size, if not exactly the same. Though lots of content creators are moving to 21:9, and a lot of content like TV and movies are in the wider 21:9 format as well. And because the only interruption on the S25 Ultra that exists is the small camera cutout, you have an uninterrupted widescreen view of what you're watching. Whereas on the iPhone, you have dynamic island creeping its way in. However, back to that whole 8-bit display thing that I mentioned, the S25 Ultra does not actually support Dolby Vision, which is a bummer on a premium flagship. And like, while we're on it, Samsung did include the ability to shoot in 10-bit log, but the thing is, you can't actually view that 10-bit log footage natively on the S25 Ultra because of its 8-bit display. It's just something that like, I kind of think is a little silly, but I mean, here, I'm done with that, let's just move on. But yeah, I mean, both are gorgeous, both are super responsive, and I really do think that I lean more toward the S25 Ultra. It's sharper at 498 ppi versus the 460 on the iPhone. It's theoretically brighter at 2600 nits versus the 2000, and it has an amazing anti-reflective coating. Aside from making it more visible in the daytime and cutting light reflections, it also makes the perceived contrast of the display much more impressive because it really amplifies those black levels and makes everything else pop. Though the thing is, like, you really can't go wrong with either, and I don't think anyone would be upset going with one over the other, at least in terms of its display. Now, when it comes to the day-to-day usability with the software, this is kind of where it gets a little tough. The S25 Ultra is shipping with One UI 7, which is built off of Android 15, and the iPhone 16 Pro Max is pretty deep into iOS 18 at this point. Now, from what I've experienced, One UI 7 seems to be really responsive and reliable, showing no issues for me whatsoever. And the iPhone, on the other hand, has been pretty hit or miss. Whether it's the app crashing issues that I've had that I've been very vocal about, issues with the keyboard not responding in some applications, and having problems with Apple CarPlay, the iPhone 16 Pro Max and iOS 18 just really hasn't been it for me. But the thing is, I can't just come out of the gate and say that Android 15 as a whole is a better experience, because Android 15 on this phone just came out, and those problems can slowly start to creep up anytime soon if they exist. So I can't say that my experience between these two has been night and day, but if I was to tell you truthfully from what I've experienced so far, my experience between these two has been night and day. One UI also now just feels much more responsive and quick. Things like the animations for opening and closing apps and backing in and out of pages have been improved, and they're also snappier. And the overall look and feel, sure, some inspiration might have been taken from, I don't know, God knows where, but I think it's become my favorite version of Android. It even has its own gimmick now, like the iPhone's Dynamic Island called Now Bar. You know how on Dynamic Island you can see things like your alarms, your music that's now playing, and so on? Now Bar does the exact same thing, albeit it's a little less convenient because it's on the lock screen and not above every other application in one fixed position like Dynamic Island. But I do like this implementation because it keeps everything in a familiar spot, which also takes away some of the clunk that comes along with using Android sometimes. I will say I think Dynamic Island is objectively better. I just think that I'm starting to get sick of the amount of space the sensors in this phone actually take up, because Dynamic Island to me has always seemed like a software solution to a hardware shortcoming, but that's just my 2 cents. All right, now when it comes to the performance, this is something that's pretty tricky to measure. The S25 Ultra is now using the Snapdragon 8 Elite, but the one that's clocked a little higher for the Samsung devices, whereas on the iPhone, it's Apple's A18 Pro SoC. And I won't get into major specifics here, but these are both chips built on a 3nm process from TSMC. Now, whether it's app download speed, resuming applications from memory, exporting photos in Lightroom, and doing basic user things, they're both great. Last year's chip was great, the chip before that was great, and you get what I mean. Now, if you're buying a flagship, or you're here watching this video because you want to know if there's a 1/100th of a second difference between opening Instagram on the iPhone versus the S25 Ultra, you've come to the wrong channel. However, something that I have observed to be interesting is on the gaming side of things. Warzone Mobile is something that I tested on the 8 Elite inside of the S25 Ultra, and I was disappointed. When it came to the performance, I felt like I wasn't getting the frame rates that I should at the graphics settings that I wanted, and the phone was getting really hot. The 8 Elite was hitting about 90 degrees Celsius, and at that point it started to thermal throttle, aka it restricts the SoC's performance by downclocking so that it can maintain better operating temperatures. Without a case, the S25 Ultra was getting really hot. It was actually uncomfortable to play, and it's something that I mentioned in my 1 week later review of this phone, and it's something that I'm still paying attention to as time goes on because I'm hoping that this gets improved. That being said, Warzone Mobile is most likely just not optimized for the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy yet, but when it comes to the iPhone, I can't recall ever really having an issue when it comes to the games and their performance. Not to say that Apple's SoC is better, but more like the community and the app developers behind it are. I feel like they care more about iOS as a platform over Android, and my assumption is because it's just easier to work with since every year there's less iPhones that are being produced over Android devices, because it's not just developers having to work with the 8th Gen Elite inside of this phone, they also have to do it for every other flagship phone that comes out with the 8 Elite, and they have to optimize their games in a way that works with lower end hardware because they want to keep the player base that they have access to on Android. So it becomes very confusing, and it's what can make gaming and stuff on Android a lot more challenging. And if you do care about gaming on mobile, the fact that AAA titles are coming to the iPhone is kind of wild. And despite the performance being there on the 8 Elite, I don't see this being a reality for Android for a very long time. However, where Samsung makes use of the extra performance though is in areas that the iPhone simply just can't do. You can plug it into a display and you have DeX, a whole Windows or Linux OS inside of your phone that you can use for schoolwork, real work, or just browsing the web when you get home after a long day. And you can also multitask by being able to split a couple of apps. And honestly, this is something that I do use and take advantage of on the Samsung, and I really do miss it when I am carrying an iPhone. All right, so let's rapid fire a couple of things here while we're just sitting and chatting. A couple of things that I've noticed about these two devices after using them. Both these phones have fantastic speakers, but for me personally, for the first time ever, I actually do like the S25 Ultras more. The iPhone sounds a little too warm for my liking, whereas the Samsungs are cleaner and louder. The S25 Ultra does also have the S Pen, which is nice for signing documents or taking notes. However, this year it did actually get a downgrade over the last year's version, since you're no longer able to use this for air gestures or as a remote shutter, which is unfortunate. Now, although the S25 Ultra does support the Qi 2 standard, it doesn't actually have the magnets internally like the iPhone does with MagSafe, meaning to use any Qi 2 or MagSafe accessories, you also need to use a case with the Qi 2 magnets. Both of these phones now can also shoot log video, a new addition to the Ultra phones, and both can do 4K 120 FPS recording. However, the S25 Ultra can also do 8K 30 frames per second video recording as well. The S25 Ultra does also charge faster at 45 watts wired and 25 watts wireless, whereas the 16 Pro Max apparently only hits a peak of about 37 watts over the wire and 25 watts wireless. Both do support Wi-Fi 7, but the iPhone tops out at Bluetooth 5.3 versus the S25 Ultra's Bluetooth 6.0. And like I did mention earlier, the iPhone does have camera control, which I won't lie is not something that I use a lot. However, it is nice to have a permanent camera shutter button, and it does also bring up Apple's visual intelligence if that's something that you want to use. All right, now I do want to talk about these cameras, but I need you to stay here and just stay focused for a second because this can get quite confusing. The S25 Ultra has 4 main cameras: a 200 megapixel main 1x lens, a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, a 50 megapixel 5x telephoto, and the new 50 megapixel ultra wide. There's also a 12 megapixel front facing camera with phase detect autofocus, and it can record video at up to 4K 60 frames per second. The iPhone 16 Pro Max has 3 main cameras: a 48 megapixel wide 1x lens, a 12 megapixel 5x telephoto, and the new 48 megapixel ultra wide. On the front, there's also a 12 megapixel selfie camera with phase detect autofocus, but it can record 4K 60 and 1080p 120 frames per second. Now, here's what makes this all kind of like confusing and honestly just really hard to get through when it comes to a video comparison. On paper, the S25 Ultra looks like it absolutely cooks the iPhone. It doesn't though, not entirely. Look, I'm gonna do a whole deep dive video about the camera performance on both the S25 Ultra and the 16 Pro Max together because I feel like that deserves an entire long video on its own just to get through every single feature, because I wanna cover things that I'm definitely gonna have to glance over in this video, like all of the extra features that come on the S25 Ultra and on the iPhone, because there's just way too many shooting modes. So if that's something that you wanna see, just make sure you go ahead and get subscribed to the channel and I will start working on it immediately. Anyways, let's look at it like this as a regular person for a second, picking up this smartphone and using it set up out of the box with everything on auto. I really do think the iPhone camera looks better. The colors are more natural, a little flat in some instances, but it doesn't look over-processed. Where I truly feel like the S25 Ultra does add a little too much in the way of software and post-processing that can kind of tear the image apart a little bit. Technically speaking, both are really sharp, both can provide really nice clean photos, and I will say, I actually think that when it comes to skin tones, the Samsung handles mine a little bit better than the iPhone. But, and I think most importantly, the iPhone is more reliable and something that I trust more for when it comes to capturing photos, especially in those lower light scenes where there may be some movement or for images indoors in a more dim location. I feel like when I whip out the Ultra, I just think that I'm wanting more or expecting more out of it. Like I said, I really do think these deserve their entire video just covering the cameras alone, because it's something that is hard to get through in a small segment in a comparison video talking about both of these devices as a whole. So let's just move on from the cameras and let's talk about something really exciting: AI. Yeah, I had you going there for a second. Okay, no, I am kidding, but I feel like it is something that we really should cover. I mean, listen, all I need to say is that the iPhone's implementation with Apple Intelligence and ChatGPT is quite half-baked. The S25 Ultra with Galaxy AI and Google Gemini does feel like a huge step above, but I really need to spend more time with the S25 Ultra. So far, I like tools like AI Select. It lets me copy and paste text from fields that you normally can't, and it's easy to access when you pull out the S Pen. There are some useful and gimmicky things on both, but as for the actual voice assistant, I much prefer Gemini. The thing is, on the iPhone, it defaults to Siri until it needs to use ChatGPT for a more difficult prompt. Now, this means there's another step getting in the way of you just getting an answer that you want quickly, and it adds more time between your requests. I also like that with the Ultra, I can just go live with Gemini and have a conversation rather than needing to bounce a prompt after prompt off of it without worrying about needing to re-trigger the assistant in case it didn't understand. And you can also use features on the Ultra like real-time call translation, and you can save your call transcripts directly onto the Samsung while you're on a call. But like, I would be flat out lying if I said that AI was gonna be a main consideration in what makes me choose a smartphone these days. However, AI has become a really big part of how I use my phone lately. And at least with the Pixel, it's something that I really enjoyed. And the fact that it is here in full force with Galaxy AI and Gemini on the S25 Ultra, it is something that like, I don't necessarily take for granted and do appreciate having it. All right, now lastly, the final thing that I wanted to touch on is the battery life. I wish I could tell you that one is dramatically better than the other, but I would say they're actually pretty even. Depending on the day and where my usage lies, they both trade blows with themselves. I'm using the S25 Ultra on the 1440p display option, which does use a little more battery life, but I never feel like I have battery anxiety with one or the other. On a heavy day for both these devices, I could get an easy 7 to 8 hours of screen on time, and with lighter usage, I know that I can push 9 to 10 hours if I'm just browsing socials or watching YouTube videos. The point being though is that despite the S25 Ultra still having a larger battery than the iPhone, Apple's optimization in this case is just way better. I think iOS has just less when it comes to overhead to run, and the S25 Ultra is just doing more in the background, which kind of eats away at that optimization. But I feel like with this year, it's not necessarily an improvement over last year's phone, so it's just good. Like it is good battery life on both, but I feel like I was just expecting a little more on the Ultra this year. Though, like I mentioned, the S25 Ultra is able to charge a touch faster, and I'm happier with it because I don't charge overnight, and usually I only charge up and top my phone when I'm in the car connected to CarPlay or Android Auto. And for me, with both, this is more than enough to get me through the day, but I do get more out of my charge with the S25 Ultra. Anyways, if you look at both of these devices kind of at like surface level, like what I just did here, you can see that not one of these is necessarily better than the other, and it really depends on who you are and what you do. I think that the S25 Ultra is gonna stay in my pocket. My God, I just shrunk. I think that the S25 Ultra is gonna stay in my pocket just because there's things on it that I like more. The utility of the S Pen is something that I do use when I have it on me. I like being able to multitask, and I think having DeX is really convenient. And while I might not think that the cameras are necessarily better than they are on the iPhone, I think the amount that you can do with them is impressive. And I like having the extra zoom range and stuff like that. I think that as a whole, the S25 Ultra is just kind of like where I lie when it comes to, you know, which device I want to put in my pocket. But I am curious to hear what you think in the comments down below. I'm also thinking about making a part 2 of this and deep diving right into the software and letting you know all of the different quirks and caveats to each phone. So if that's also something that you want to see, let me know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, a like and a sub down below goes a really long way. And before you leave, go ahead and put a plant emoji in the comments to let me know who stayed throughout the whole thing. So I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.